share my screen with you so we can get started. Let's see if that works. Okay, you have recording on? You all good? Okay, good, perfect. So, and you see the picture? Good, okay, I'm gonna make you all disappear. So yeah, hi, good evening, everybody. Together with a little delay, we're gonna talk about frequencies. And so this title may be a little different what you expected, because I'm gonna talk about frequency in the terms of three brains. And so what I'm trying to do is not to look through a tunnel vision at the human body like many specialties do. I'm trying to take a holistic view where I can see everything what's happening in the body so I can connect the different body systems. And so the conventional command center is typically the brain with the left and the right brain, but I'm going to show you that there's a few other things going on in your body. And so, you know, these things kind of always listen to your gut, listen to your heart, speak from your heart. There is a voice that doesn't use words, listen to it, right? So that's the gut and the heart feeling. And so that will already tell you that the three brains are the brain, the heart, and the gut. And so today we're going to talk about these frequencies, how they connect. And yes, at the end, I'm also going to talk about whether essential oils do have frequencies or not. So the first thing I would like you to understand is a very important nerve that goes from the brain. In fact, it's the longest nerve in our body and goes all the way down to your lower abdomen. And interesting, since the brain is the command center, you would think that most of the commands would go from the brain down to the organs. But yet it's exactly the opposite. 85% of the signals that run to this vagal nerve or vagus nerve will go from the body up to the brain, and only 15% are the returning commands. So one will ask itself, who sends out so many signals? And the answer is the microbiome. And so some of you have heard me talk a lot about the microbiome in the last 10, 15 years, but what is it? It's the collective genetic information of all your microorganisms, such as bacteria, fungi, and some other type of almost bacteria-like organisms. You have about 100 trillions of these microorganisms. Now, I have to disappoint you a little bit, because when you look in the mirror, all you see is 10% human cells and 90% microbial cells. Yes, you're basically a big fungus or a big bacteria. And when it comes to the genetic information, it's even worse, because what comes from your mom and dad is each 0.5%, adding up to 1%, but 99% of your genetic information is in the microbes, in the bacteria. And most of your microbiome, all these little microbes, are in your gut. So why do we have all those? Well, they help to digest food, they support the immune system. So important these days. About 70% of the immune system is in fact in the gut and connected to the microbiome. So these little bacteria detoxify toxic compounds, they produce vitamins, they metabolize drugs, and yes, they do influence your brain, and they do much more. So let's look how we prepare our food, right? Glyphosate goes on the fields more in the US and Asia than in Europe, because they limited or they even prohibited the use of this terrible herbicide. And when you really look at it, glyphosate is an antibiotic. The patent is antibiotic. And so you can imagine what happens to the soil when you soak it with an antibiotic. It will kill everything that is in the soil, all the soil microbes, and we need those for healthy plants. And what will it do to your gut? When you eat those foods, you know, that are like pickled in this herbicide, it will kill your microbiome. And so it will kill your immune system, it will kill your brain. I mean, so many things depend on all that. Because when you have inflammation in your gut, you will have inflammation in your brain. There is a bunch of inflammatory compounds that go from the gut to the brain. And when we look at where in the brain, we're going to have to look at the limbic system, which is the old system in the middle of the brain. And when we cut from the front, we see here, there's a little part, and you see this is normal size, and you compare it with the other side. This is an Alzheimer patient. You see how much smaller that is. That's the area we call the hippocampus. And the hippocampus is in charge of memory, emotions, and a few other things. And so if you can imagine when you have dementia or Alzheimer, this is what it goes, it shrinks first. It's this area, and this is why people lose their memory and they have unstable emotions. So chronic brain inflammation leads to a decline in hippocampal receptors and the size of the hippocampus. So let's look at this hippocampus one more time. One, what is the name? You see, this is the structure here, or in this picture, kind of the yellow, that's only half of it. Well, it looks like a seahorse, and seahorse in Old Greek means hippocampus. And so when you turn that seahorse a little around, you're going to see and recognize this structure. So the good news is, for many people, that's the bad news, the brain is shrinking because the microbiome is not healthy. As I told you, there's inflammation going on, there's a shrinkage of your hippocampus going on, therefore you have loss of memory and you have unstable emotions. But this study, a few years old, will tell you that neurogenesis, genesis is the regeneration, neuro, the brain. So hippocampal neurogenesis, it means you can regrow your hippocampus. And it's regulated by the microbiome. So all you need to do is to figure out how to support the microbiome, and you can regrow your hippocampus. Now you're going to ask, what does that have to do with energy? Well, here we go. It's about food, because food will change your microbiome. And so we have different types of food. We have this bioacidic food that will basically kill you because it's full of poisons. Then you have highly processed food, which is just static. It will not move you any bit forward. Then you have all this healthy food that's bioactive. So that's really good. But the best food is functional food. Functional food, foods that help your microbiome to generate and grow and improve your gut, your digestion, and all these things we talked about. And so for me, the energy of the food is increasing as you move up to the level of functional foods. But the energy of food is not just how many carbohydrates and proteins and fats you have and how many calories they give. So the question is, do we have another form of energy? And some of the stuff you see online would suggest that's true, because here you see cooked cabbage and live cabbage. And in this picture, where they took some energy into the cabbage and then released it and took pictures, you see that live cabbage seems to be much more energy rich than cooked cabbage. But we'll talk a little bit about that. So let's go to these very famous people, right? Einstein already said we have a mass and it's equivalent to the amount of energy and vice versa. So here's our energy, right? And then you go to Nikola Tesla, and he said, if you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. So these are basically the frequencies we have. It starts with very low frequencies of static electromagnetic fields, goes all the way up to X-ray and other radiation sources. And in the middle, you have our cell phones and TVs and things like that. And then we have quantum physics. And what quantum physics says, you have a core made of protons and neutrons. And then you have electrons, those yellow things, flying around in circles like the moon around the Earth and things like that. And when you look at it, these electrons can flip. They can flip into another kind of circumference or radius around the core. So they hear, and suddenly they're not here. And that's kind of what quantum physics describes. Now, a lot of people I found in my career are using this quantum physics to heal people over continents, over the phone, all kinds of things. And in many cases, when I ask them to explain me a little bit what they do, they have no clue. So if some of you are doing this quantum healing, I hope at least you understand what you're doing when it comes to quantum physics, because it's a quite interesting field of research. Now, when you want to bring it down, you can basically probably all bring down to what we call the string theory. What does that mean? We have a matter made out of different molecules. Here you see a molecule. Molecule is made out of atoms. The atom, again, has a nucleus with neutrons and protons and have these electrons. So when you look at the electrons, what that is, it's just a string of vibration. And then we go into the core, we look at neutrons and protons, and these are quarks that make those neutrons. And when you take a quark apart, you come again to this little vibrational loop. And so at the end of the day, everything in our body, at least, is vibration, but probably everything on Earth and in the universe is vibration. The only problem is this theory would need at least another 9 dimensions to be proven. It has never been proven so far, but that's the whole idea behind things. So when you talk about frequency, certainly you need to talk about the string theory, about life, quantum physics, vibrations, oscillation, all these kind of things. But that brings us to a quite interesting field in bioscience, the biofield science and healing. It's kind of emerging frontier in medicine and health. And just going back almost 100 years, when you were hit by a lightning, you saw these figures on your skin that looks like, little lightning itself. And Lichtenberg started capturing those in glass, and you can buy those in souvenir shops where you see what they do. They unload a certain charge and it's frozen in glass. And then they make these interesting pictures where they capture the frequency and the electricity. And so there was a Russian couple, Kirlian, so Semyon and Valentina Kirlian, I think in about 1930 or so. He was a repairman for medical equipment in Russia. And he was working into the night, and then suddenly he saw a spark from one of his devices. And with his wife, he thought, oh, would that be cool if we could capture that on a photographic plate? And they started taking things like leaves and putting a charge in there and then let the charge unravel, and they took pictures. And you see, this was a leaf, and then they cut off the part of the leaf, and they still couldn't measure the energy. Now, I'm going to explain to you why that all happened. It's when I speak, like if I would be a physics professor, I will quickly unravel the secret behind these kind of phantom leaf effects and these pictures. But that has led to a whole bunch of stuff. You have seen these probably a raw tomato, much more energy than a cooked tomato, raw broccoli, cooked broccoli, or raw meat and cooked meat. And you can even go a step further where you measure the fingertips of two people. And you see these people don't like each other. So one doesn't want to do anything. And the other one is like probably going out in anger because he doesn't like the other person. And you see the energy that unloads is very high. Whereas when both people like each other, the energy that comes out of the fingertips is very uniform and very kind of peaceful. So let me explain to you, well, let me go back and explain to you real quick what happens. So when you load any substance or any leaf or organic substance with energy, and you let that energy go out, the energy will follow little ionic channels that we have in the air. And all it takes, it's moisture. The more moisture, the more energy will go to these channels, and the clearer you will see the picture. So how do you explain this phantom up here when they cut off the leaf and it still shows it? Well, because that leaf was before on the photoplate and left moisture back. And so the moisture still unloads into these photoionic channels. And so therefore you're going to see that. And same thing here, right? A raw tomato, raw broccoli, raw meat has more moisture than the cooked one. And that's why it will unload much more. That's kind of the secret behind all that. And so this is a little more complicated, right? Because here, what's the moisture on a finger? That's sweat. And we need to figure out what's then the connection between sweat and the human and being angry or being happy. Well, there's a vegetative nervous system that will either make you sweat more or less. And so obviously, if you don't like each other, the one person was sweating profusely, and you see the unloading of here into the ionic channels, whereas the other person was pretty passive aggressive and didn't unload anything or didn't create any sweat. Whereas when those two like each other, they have a similar vegetative nervous system discharge and therefore similar humidity on the fingertips. It's quite interesting when you follow these things, but that's the secret behind Kirlian photography. And for centuries, we have been looking at a variety of frequencies that influence our body, from the frequency of meridians and acupuncture. And they found a few years later, I mean, just a few years back, there in fact are some channels in the lymphatic fluids or lymphatic vessels that are conducting some energy. And that's maybe the secret that lies behind the meridians. But all over the world, different technologies have been used, up to like real-time videography of kind of these technologies. Now, let's look a little bit, because I talked about the three brains, right? So let's look at the heart and the brain real quick. So the heart electric field is about 60 times greater in amplitude than the electrical activity generated by the brain. And so we can look at that by the amplitude of an EKG or ECG, which is the electrocardiogram, comparing that to the EEG, which is the electroencephalogram. And when you look at the strength of a magnetic field, which is perpendicular to the way the nerves are transmitting frequencies and energy, you see the heart is about 100 times greater than the magnetic field generated by the brain. Now, I also added the last two bullet points because you see on the internet, the heart is up to 5,000 times stronger electromagnetically than the brain. I have no clue where this number is coming from. And the heart is about 100 times stronger electrically than the brain. And I have no clue where it is coming from. I just wanted to show you it's out there. But just to show you, this is no theoretical thing. These are new devices that we use in medicine, brand new. Some of them are still in the research stage, like where we do magnetogastrography. Yes, we can measure the magnetic field of your bowels outside of your body. Same thing with magnetocardiography. We can measure your heart by capturing the magnetic field of the heart, and the same thing with the brain, which is called magnetoencephalography. So these devices exist, and this is kind of the direction we're taking in medicine, using non-invasive devices to look into your body, in this case, using electric frequencies. And so when you look at the first few studies in this field, the heart produces a significant electromagnetic field, both within and outside the body. And people think that the heart function is not just to pump blood in your body, but also it is a generator of bioinformation. So when you come close, that your heart starts banging pretty quickly because you like the person that you are across. So there must be some overlap where you connect to that person, maybe just visually, but we think there's another overlap. And when you look at the HeartMate Institute was looking at these things, they are the forefront on the research about that. And here you see a study that represents one of the first successful attempts to directly measure an energy exchange between people. Let me show you that. So here you have a couple sleeping, and within about probably half an hour of sleep, you're going to see that the heart rates of the male and the female in this picture almost synchronize. Right? So that's almost heard of, but this is what you do. You synchronize with your partner. Now, the same thing might happen between brain waves and heart waves. And here you see the big line that with the big peak here, that's the heart EKG. And you see the smaller line, that's your brain waves. And you see they have a peak at a similar place like the heart wave. And so where this becomes pretty interesting is when a mom holds her baby. The baby has the typical heartbeat with this big peak. And then we see that mom, the brain, will have a peak at the same place. So there is a connection between the two, between the heart of one human and the brain of the other human. It's quite interesting. And so for my wife and I, we rescue dogs. That's my wife's calling, and I support her wholeheartedly in it. And for us, it's, animal love is pure and unadulterated energy and love. And so we huddle multiple times a day with our dogs and just take that energy. What does it do? Well, look, here's an example. Here is the boy, Josh, and his dog, Mabel. And you have Mabel separated from the dog, then they open the door and you see, then Josh starts patting the dog and you see how these rhythms, the heart rhythms, how they immediately start synchronizing. And the moment you close the door, they desynchronize. And the same thing has been shown with horses. So you see Ellen here with her horse tonopath. And same thing, the moment she goes and starts rubbing on the back of the horse, they start synchronizing. And the moment she walks away, they desynchronize. So it's quite interesting when you see that. Now, what you also need to understand, there's a connection between frequency and emotions, right? And I already told you the emotions start in the gut with the microbiome, and that has an influence on your hippocampus. So you see, everything I told you before is coming back now. So appreciation, you see, there's a more lower frequency, whereas anger creates a more higher frequency. And that's an average of 12 different peoples where they measured the frequency changes in the electromagnetic fields depending on emotions. And so when you really look at, you have your brain here, your gut down here, and you have the heart in the middle. And I told you the heart, again, is the third brain. And when we look at the heart rate variability, what does that mean? Your heart is beating, let's say, like 70 times a minute. But it's not always the same distance between each single of these 70 beats, because you're breathing in, you're breathing out, that fills the heart a little bit more. When you breathe in, it empties the heart a little bit more because you have more pressure in the chest with the air that you breathe in. And so these, from beat to beat, these distances are changing. And when you're frustrated, they're changing extremely fast. Whereas when you calm and appreciative, then they change less. And so you can measure that. And so again, microbes in your gut affect your emotions. And here we have our emotions in our brain. So now we get negative emotions. They go to what we call incoherence, which is this red line here that is not really coherent, versus the very coherent green line on this side, which is basically heart rate variability. And all of that is guided by your gut, by the microbiome. So the gut signals to the brain has the emotion, they signal down frustration, anger, anxiety, stress, which goes back down to the gut, which talks to the heart, and the brain talks to the heart. And you see this incoherence. Or on the other side, if you have appreciation, gratitude, compassion, and love, all of that takes another circle. And this is kind of where you want to be. So you need to let anger go. You need to forgive other people so you can go on the good side of these circles, because all of that is connected: the brain and the gut, the heart and the gut, and the heart and the brain. So I have explained to you a little bit about the frequencies in the body. Now comes the big questions. Do essential oils have frequencies? Yeah, right. It's like tree huggers would believe that. Well, I became a tree hugger, so I have to believe it. Well, let me just put on the hat of a chemistry professor. When you take, for example, a frankincense resin and you take it apart, you're going to find a whole bunch of different components in there, like alpha pinene, incense salt acetate, boswellic acid. And you see all these chemical structures have these connections wherever they touch, right? And you know that these connections in the chemical formula are held together by some forces, and these forces are vibrations. And in fact, here you see the different ways that these things can be attached to each other. They have like all these different ways on how they can move and vibrate. And so when you look at what Gary was researching way early, I mean, 30 years, 35 years ago, I was able to walk his cellar, and I found, he told me there were some devices. And so I went and I searched and I found a big box that had multiple devices, and this was one of them. And I asked him, what did you use it for? And we had to search and for like until I found this little paper, which was a almost faded out copy of the manual. And then Gary remembered, and he told me what he was doing. He was measuring frequency in the field of certain soils and certain plants and certain insects. And that led to some research where he took some different plants, I mean, the same plant in different soils. And some of the soil was untreated. Some of them was treated with biogenesis soil, meaning with live soil full of microbes. And then he added frequencies. And so the best growing plants, when he was like on top here, when he was doing both, when he added a microbe-rich soil and he treated it with frequencies. And so when you look at, he measured that with the roots, and you saw E, which was the one that he treated with frequency and microbes in the soil, had the best roots. And so this was the device then that he used to measure these things, the frequency, and it came from Bruce Tanillo. Bruce was a gentleman who invented microbe-rich soil already like 30, 35 years ago. And that's why he and Gary met, because Gary as a farmer was very interested to have better soil. And so they used the machine from Bruce to start measuring the soils and then measuring the frequencies they would put in the greenhouse and all that. And then Gary had the idea and said, why don't we use this machine to measure frequencies of oils and the body? And this is what you see in the first edition of the Essential Oil Desk Reference, where you see a whole bunch of frequency, maybe Rose somewhere here with 320 megahertz being one of the highest frequency oils. The problem is that they used a device that was not intended to measure any oil or not intended to measure any body system, like the kidneys, the bones, the skin, whatever it was. And so can we repeat those measurements? No, absolutely not. Because at that time, imagine 30 years ago, I mean, cell phones were rather rare and rather new. And so there was not all these TV waves and cell phone waves going through the ether that you would capture with a very crude device. And so all I need to know, I mean, I need to let you decide whether you want to use the numbers that you see here. But all I can tell you, we cannot repeat these measurements. In fact, I tried to convince NASA to build a set of research that is completely isolating from the environment so we could try to repeat some of these measurements, but I was not able to do that because the people I knew retired and then I couldn't get to the right people. So the last thing I want to talk about is aligning your frequency with the Earth's frequency. And when you look, the Earth is wobbling at a certain frequency, and we call this the Schumann resonance frequency. It's like a heartbeat of the Earth, and it's at 7.83 hertz. Now, when you look at the brain waves, the 7.83 hertz correspond to what we call the theta waves, which are quite slow waves that you get when you're like in meditation or very quiet just before you go to sleep. And so if you could connect the Earth's energy of 7.83 hertz with your brain, you would think it would calm down your brain, calm down your body, reduce your stress hormones and all these kind of things. And this is exactly what you do with grounding or earthing. Here is a study that will show that earthing results in a shift of what we call the autonomous nervous system. And it reduces your stress hormone cortisol. And when you look at this, so here is a bunch of people, everybody has, quite high cortisol levels. And 24 hours after grounding, they remeasure and you see it all came down. Cortisol levels are normal again. So it's really stress reducing, showing in this study. Here's another study that looks at a bunch of different things like the brain, muscle system, cardiovascular system, and earthing or grounding, again, results in a shift of autonomic system towards reduction of stress level. And you see this here. You have all these brain waves that they measure, different brain waves, and then they start earthing and they go away. These are the excitement brain waves where your brain has complete attention. And you see down here, that's delta and theta. So they start increasing, meaning you get much more quiet when you connect barefoot to the earth. Of course, you want to do this on grass and not on concrete. And so when I talked with Gary about these things, we did many discussion about this. And for him, the oil Northern Lights Black Spruce, he said, represented the best grounded oil. Why? Because it was capturing all the energy from the Northern Lights in these very, very high, tall trees and coming down the tree. And in fact, he asked me like at 3 in the morning to go and hug with him a tree. And it was just awesome how we could feel the energy. So I think the Northern Lights Black Spruce is an oil I have running basically every day in my office here. And Gary also started teaching me how to eat dirt, because he said, not only are you going to taste whether the dirt, the soil is depleted of microbes and nutrients, but you're also going to feel the energy of the soil. And he was right. I mean, after I ate dirt, half around the world with him supervising me kind of thing, there is a difference you can really taste in the earth. And I do this now whenever I go on a farm. I taste the earth to see how it is. I mean, seed to seal starts really with the soil, and you need to know your soil to know your oil. And so when we conclude, everything has frequency, and frequency is everything. And essential oils do have frequency. It's the law of nature, it's the law of chemistry, it's the law of physics. But how and exactly what best to measure is still a very open question. Gary certainly used a device that was probably not really suited very well to measure these frequencies. And until we know, I guess you should decide for yourself whether you want to use what has been published in these books or not. And if you want to, for example, take an oil and connect it to a frequency of an organ system. And I must tell you, NASA has researched a lot of organ system because they want to know what frequencies will be encountered by the astronauts when they're in space. And so frequency of organ system is something very interesting and very important in space medicine. And yet we have no table at this point with exact frequencies of organ systems. So again, if you use oils with a frequency that you take out of the old book that was measured with a device that maybe is not optimal to measure an oil, and you compare that with a table that you got off the internet, and the most advanced physicians and researchers don't have these tables. So you start asking or wondering, where are these tables coming from? And then when you start using oils to treat the frequency in the body system, I'm not quite sure if all that will work out. But again, it's just one way to do it. And if you feel in your gut that's the right thing, then I will not dissuade you from doing so. And this is kind of what I wanted to show you on frequencies. And I went a little faster because I started late. So at this point, I guess I will take a few questions until my son will come and will tell you about CBD. Jill, do you want to turn on microphones, or is it like in the question? Did you read a little bit what the chat was doing?
Let's see over here. I think I saw it, and then they were answered. So let's see what we've got. Oh, here, there was somebody that says, what does it mean for a person whose body stopped sweating? Mine stopped sweating in 2008.
Well, okay, the sweat is the vegetative nervous system. So it's a nervous system that you cannot really influence, right? You cannot just stand up and tell your gut to poop, right? I mean, unless you just start pushing like crazy, maybe then it will work. No, the gut will start moving itself. The heart will beat by itself, and it goes up and down on the heart rate depending on the needs of your body. And the same thing happens with your sweat. Now, so there is a change in the tone of this nervous system that will make people sweat more or less. And there could be a change, maybe in the myelinization of these nerves, meaning what's surrounding the nerve, the myelin sheath, and that could cause the nerve not to work as well. Like people with multiple sclerosis may find these kind of things, and some other kind of diseases.
Next one, what are your favorite oils for grounding?
Well, clearly it's the black spruce, but also the oil grounding. I think there's all the trees in general are really, I feel, to be very, very grounding. And when you take these blends apart, it's very interesting that when you look at almost every blend that Gary did, you're going to find a tree that is very grounding. You're going to find a flower, and you're going to find a citrus fruit, amongst other things. So you need to look at the thing. For example, present time is the simplest of those, which has a tree, a flower, and a citrus fruit. Quite interesting. So it's one way to look at blend and blending. Now, I see somebody says you have a bioscanning device called the Biowell from Konstantin Korotkov. Yeah, I met Konstantin, and this was the only device that was somewhat supported by Mary and Gary, just to let you know. And what he did, he took some software and he measured the fingertips with the moisture And same thing, like the Kirlian photography, he unloaded the energy into this box, and he then created around the fingertip a structure or a pattern. And then he took a software that looked at the auras of the 7 auras of the body. And he could tell when there was a defect in a certain body part, you would see a defect in the aura of that body part. And so this is the only device in this kind of field that has quite some interesting research that was repeated and showed positive results. So just to that device. So what else do we have?
What is the best thing that you recommend to reduce inflammation in the gut?
Lifestyle. It's called epigenetics. And quite honestly, the reason why my computer crashed is because I'm working on 2 videos for introduction of 2 super duper new product at convention. So my Apple computer is completely overloaded with video clips and everything. And this computer just crashed, and that's why I was late. So 2 outstanding new product. I know that everyone listening will use these 2 products every single day for the rest of your life. I'm very convinced that they're so great. But anyway, I just got off the question. What was your question? I got so excited about the 2 products. They're so good.
I got excited and I was like, wait, what was the question? It was what you recommend to reduce inflammation in the gut.
Yeah. So again, it's lifestyle. So it's exercise, sleep, nutrition, dense nutrition, good super plant nutrition. It's all about movement. It's about healthy thinking, about forgiveness. All these things come together, and that's what's epigenetics. Epigenetics mean you're using influences from your life to turn on and off your genes. They have like little light switches, and in fact, that's part of the video I was working on this afternoon, where I showed you a little light switch where you turn on a light and turn it off. Your genes, when you're born with them, it doesn't mean that they're going to express. Express means the gene will translate into a command, right? So you have bad genes, like you have cancer genes. Well, then you think, oh, I'm born with cancer genes, so it's a breast cancer gene, so I need to take off my breast. No, what you need to do is a healthy lifestyle, because the healthy lifestyle may be able to turn off that unhealthy gene. And we have seen this with prostate cancer. When you have prostate cancer stage 1, most urologists will send you back home and said, now you start eating healthy, you're going to start moving around, you're going to make sure you sleep at least 8 hours, you're going to have a healthy mind, a good social spirit, all that, and that will change your genes and will make you healthy. And we have seen this. There's plenty of research, and that's the field of epigenetics. It's biohacking. It's biohacking your cells. And I have been working with this field for at least 14 years. And I'm going to come out, I just went out, I must say, 3 months ago in Europe, in the German-speaking part of Europe, with my epigenetic program that optimizes body weight, immune system, sleep, exercise, all these things we do. And I hope to be ready in 2023 with the same program in English. I still need to write the book and all these kind of things. So epigenetics is absolutely fascinating, and we can use the essential oils and our frequencies to influence this epigenetics. I mean, it's just absolutely amazing.
Can you address what decreases our frequency? Gary always talked about coffee decreasing frequencies, but what else?
Well, when you really look at scientifically, what decreases your frequency or the frequency of your brain is certain essential oils. It's not a bad thing. It means you just get calmer. It's like when you fall asleep, your frequency of the brain gets slower and your frequency of the heart gets slower. Your heart starts beating slower and your gut starts moving a little bit faster because the others are resting, so the gut has a little more energy to do something. And very often when you wake up, you have a bowel movement in the morning. That's because the bowel was moving. And then when you wake up, then all the frequencies go up again. So I'm just looking at this scientific, measurable stuff, and not necessarily a coughing. And, you cannot, I have not seen a measurement equipment where I can measure the frequency of the body. I just haven't seen it. And so I know there's a bunch of equipment out there that will measure a whole bunch of different things. I mean, I'm just thinking about Cyto, Itovi, and all these things. But at the end of the day, it's all in the software, and you have no clue what they measure. You have no clue how they measure an oil or a product, whether it's Young Living or not a product, and how they connect the two. It's all made in the algorithm of the software. And in some cases, you can influence the software, which tells you that probably the technology is not valid, because if you can change something on your computer to give a different result, that's not good, right? So anyway, there's for me, I'm just a scientist. I have to apologize for all of you who love quantum physics and frequencies. I need to be able to measure and to see and to prove. And what most of you do, I cannot see, I cannot measure, I cannot prove. And so if experience will tell you that if you do something with an oil because you think it has a certain frequency, and you want to treat the kidney because you think the kidney has a certain frequency, and if that works and that person is doing better afterwards, all the powers to you, right? But scientifically, it's very difficult to comprehend. And now you see already the trouble that Gary and I were in, because we lived so long together. We're having these discussions almost every second night, and we were just like going at it, right? We were going at each other until we found the middle ground where we could agree on something. It's very interesting when you come from different parts of, like, he came from the complete alternative part of the world, and I came from the complete school medicine part. And the nice thing was that we met somewhere in the middle.
All right, and we're gonna end on this question, and I'm not sure why it says in 2 words, but verbatim, just in 2 words, could you please explain why seasonal allergies happen to people and how to help to overcome them as compliantly as we can? 2 words, Dr. Ollie.
Wow, so I didn't even understand all your question because you were going a little out. So allergies about people that do what? Repeat the question one more time. Oh, here it comes.
Posted it so it popped up at the very end.
Yeah, okay. Please explain why seasonal allergy happened to people. Well, because so we are born with a certain set of, again, genes. And it could be that you have developed an allergy against something, meaning you don't like, your body doesn't like it. And since everybody's different, we can measure these things, right? You can poke your skin and you can figure out if you're allergic or not. And how to overcome it? Well, you can do what we call desensitizing, meaning you get little mini doses, and then one day, hopefully you don't react anymore. I use essential oils. I love to use lavender and peppermint and blue tansy, for example, if I have my seasonal allergies. But then, of course, you can have more. I mean, that's more than 2 words, I apologize. But anyway, you can have serious allergies, like I have bee and wasp allergy, and I had a bee sting me a few months ago in my throat. I was drinking a can of Zing, and I didn't realize the little honeybee went into the can. And the moment I'm swallowing, I feel it in my throat, and boom, right? And I feel like fire. And so, of course, I knew right away that something needs to happen. Of course, I'm like miles away from civilization. So what I took my purification that I had in my bottle, in my pants, and I gurgled like crazy. And then I took some berry extract, which I have with me because I learned that in Romania, when you have bee stings, like certain elderberry and other berry extract will help you. So anyway, this is what you can do. You can treat this alternatively, or you can treat it with medicine. Yeah, more than 2 words. So don't ask me questions. I will answer like a half an hour.
It was so wonderful. But thank you, Dr. Ollie, for all of that information. I know that everybody's walking away from here with an appreciation of frequencies and how they can, utilize their products better. So thank you for gracing us with your wisdom again. And I hope to see you back soon, because we love when you teach us.
Well, get ready